The rushing water of the Animas River was unforgiving as it swept Willow Anderson's body downstream. Her desperate gasps for air drowned by the roar of the current that had stolen her from the riverbank. The spring melt had transformed the normally gentle waters outside Rico, Colorado, into a churning monster that clawed at her riding skirt, threatening to drag her under in the spring of 1879. Her fingernails scraped against slippery river rocks as she fought to gain purchase against the relentless pull. "Hold tight, I've got you." The deep voice cut through her panic as a strong hand grasped her wrist. Willow's eyes, stinging from the frigid water, found the determined face of a man she'd never seen before, a cowboy leaning precariously from his horse at the river's edge, his other hand gripping a tree root for leverage. Willow's strength was fading fast. Her waterlogged clothes weighed her down as the current yanked at her body. The stranger's fingers dug into her skin, refusing to let go despite the force of the water threatening to claim them both. His gray eyes locked with hers, steady and certain. "I won't let you go," he promised through gritted teeth, his arm straining as he began pulling her toward shore. "Just keep fighting." The words gave Willow the strength she needed. With one final surge of desperate energy, she kicked against the current as the cowboy dragged her from the water's grasp. She collapsed onto the muddy bank, coughing and trembling, her lungs burning as they remembered how to breathe air instead of water. "Thank you," she gasped, looking up at her savior as he dismounted his chestnut stallion. Water streamed from her once neat chignon, plastering strands of auburn hair across her face. "I thought I was going to die." The cowboy knelt beside her, removing his duster to wrap around her shivering shoulders. "Name's Owen Yates," he said, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "You're a long way from town, miss." "Willow Anderson," she managed between chattering teeth. "My wagon. There was a washout in the road. The horses spooked." She gestured vaguely upstream, remembering the terrifying moment when the earth had given way beneath the wagon wheels. Owen helped her to her feet, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "Let's get you warm before that river chill sets in your bones. My cabin's not far." Willow hesitated only briefly before nodding. She had little choice, soaked to the skin miles from Rico, with no horse and night approaching. The cowboy lifted her easily onto his horse before mounting behind her. His arms formed a protective circle around her as he took the reins, and despite her ordeal, Willow found herself oddly comforted by the steady beat of his heart against her back. Neither could have known that the river's cruel current had just changed the course of their lives forever. Owen Yates kept his arms firmly around the shivering woman as his horse, Rusty, carefully picked his way through the rocky terrain. He could feel her trembling against his chest, her breath coming in shaky gasps that concerned him. River water in May was dangerously cold, and she'd been in it far too long. "Just a bit farther," he assured her as his cabin came into view, a modest but sturdy structure nestled against a stand of ponderosa pines. Smoke still curled from the chimney where he'd left a fire burning that morning. When they reached the cabin, Owen dismounted first, then reached up to help Willow down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her against him, scooping her into his arms without hesitation. "I can walk," she protested weakly, but her head lolled against his shoulder, betraying her exhaustion. "No need," Owen replied, carrying her toward the door. He managed to push it open with his boot, grateful he hadn't bothered with the lock. Inside, the warmth of the cabin enveloped them immediately. He set Willow down gently on the wooden chair near the fire. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly, then cleared his throat when her eyes widened. "I'll step outside while you change. I have some spare clothes in that trunk. They'll be too big, but they're dry." Willow nodded, clutching the duster tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Yates." "Owen," he corrected, moving to stir the fire and add another log. "No need for formalities when you've nearly drowned on my watch." He pulled a worn flannel shirt and a pair of drawstring trousers from the trunk, setting them on the table beside her. "There's a blanket on the bed, too. I'll see to my horse, give you some privacy." Outside, Owen took longer than necessary tending to Rusty, removing the saddle and brushing the horse down thoroughly. His mind kept returning to the woman in his cabin. He'd been living alone for 3 years now, ever since coming to Colorado to stake his claim on a small silver mine up in the hills. The mine hadn't yielded much, but it was enough to keep him in supplies while he built up his small herd of cattle. He rarely ventured into Rico except for supplies, preferring the solitude of his mountain home to the bustle of the growing mining town. He'd learned the hard way that people brought complications, and complications brought pain. When he judged enough time had passed, Owen knocked on his own door. "Miss Anderson, are you decent?" "Yes, please come in." Owen entered to find Willow wrapped in his clothes and the woolen blanket, her wet garments hanging from the backs of chairs near the fire. Her auburn hair had been loosened from its pins and hung in damp waves down her back. The firelight caught the copper highlights, making them glow like embers. She looked both vulnerable and determined, sitting straighter when he entered as if to prove her strength. "How are you feeling?" he asked, moving to the small stove to put on a pot of coffee. "Better, thank you." Her voice was steadier now. "I don't know how to repay you for your kindness." Owen waved away her gratitude. Any decent person would have done the same. He busied himself with the coffee to avoid looking at her too long. Something about this woman unsettled him, not in an unpleasant way, but in a manner that made him acutely aware of how long he'd been alone. "You mentioned your wagon was lost," he asked, changing the subject. Willow's face fell. "Yes, I was traveling to Rico to meet my uncle. He owns the Mercantile there, Anderson's general store. I'm to help him run it." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "Everything I owned was in that wagon." Owen frowned. "The current's too strong to search now, but tomorrow we might recover some of your things." The river sometimes deposits debris in the shallows downstream. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to her. "For tonight, you're welcome to stay here. I'll take you to town in the morning." "I hate to impose further," Willow said, accepting the cup gratefully. "It's no imposition. I couldn't in good conscience send you back out tonight." Owen settled into the chair opposite hers. "Are you hungry? I have some stew I can heat up." Willow nodded, a small smile finally touching her lips. "I am, actually. Nearly drowning works up quite an appetite." Owen found himself chuckling at her unexpected humor. "So it seems." He moved to the iron pot hanging by the fire, stirring the contents before setting it to warm. "You're a long way from home, Miss Anderson. Where are you from?" "St. Louis," she replied. "After my parents died last winter, influenza took them both within days of each other. There wasn't much keeping me there. Uncle William is my only family now." Owen nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry for your loss." Willow stared into her coffee. "It's been difficult. My father was a bookkeeper. He always wanted me to have an education, so I trained as a teacher." A shadow crossed her face. "But circumstances changed. When Uncle William wrote offering me a place here, it seemed like providence." Owen didn't press for details. Everyone in the West had a story, and most preferred to keep parts of it buried. He understood that better than most. As they ate the simple supper of venison stew and cornbread, Owen found himself studying his unexpected guest. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet dignity about Willow Anderson that impressed him. Her hands were delicate but not idle. He noticed how efficiently she handled herself, even in crisis. Her green eyes held intelligence, and something else he couldn't quite name, a wariness, perhaps, that spoke of hurts beyond the loss of her parents. "Have you been in Rico long?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence. "I come into town occasionally for supplies, but I prefer it out here," Owen replied. "I've got 20 head of cattle and I do some hunting and trapping. It's peaceful." "It must get lonely," Willow observed, then flushed slightly. "I apologize if that's too forward." Owen considered her words. "I've found most people are lonelier in a crowd than they ever are in solitude," he said finally. "Out here, at least you expect to be alone. It's the loneliness you don't expect that cuts deepest." Willow's eyes widened slightly at his words, and for a moment, Owen regretted his candor. He wasn't accustomed to speaking his mind so freely. "I understand that," she said softly, surprising him. "Being alone by choice is different from being alone because there's no one left." Something passed between them, then a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Owen cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. "You should rest," he said, standing to clear their bowls. "You can take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire." Willow started to protest, but a yawn betrayed her exhaustion. "Thank you, Owen, for everything." Later, as Owen lay on his bedroll near the dying embers of the fire, listening to the soft, even breathing of his guest, he wondered what twist of fate had brought Willow Anderson into his carefully constructed solitude. He'd spent 3 years building walls around himself, determined never again to feel the pain of loss. Yet somehow, in the span of an afternoon, this woman had slipped through a crack he hadn't even known existed. It was just one night, he reminded himself. Tomorrow he would take her to Rico, to her uncle and her new life, and return to his own. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more. Yet even as he tried to convince himself, Owen knew something had changed. The river that had nearly claimed Willow's life had also washed away something of his carefully maintained isolation. With that unsettling thought, he closed his eyes, willing sleep to come before his mind could wander further down paths he'd long ago sworn never to travel again. Dawn broke clear and bright over the San Juan Mountains, bathing Owen's cabin in golden light. He had risen early, as was his habit, moving quietly so as not to disturb Willow. After tending to his few animals, he returned to find her awake and attempting to bring some order to her tangled hair with his comb. "Good morning," she said, a touch of color rising to her cheeks when she noticed him watching. "I hope you don't mind." She gestured with the comb. "Not at all," Owen replied, setting a pail of fresh milk on the table. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." Willow had managed to dry her dress by the fire overnight, though it was still wrinkled and bore evidence of her time in the river. "Though I fear I look a fright." "You look like someone who survived being dragged downriver," Owen said with unexpected gentleness. "That's something to be proud of, not apologize for." Willow's lips curved into a smile that transformed her face, brightening her eyes and revealing a dimple in her left cheek. Owen found himself momentarily transfixed before turning away to busy himself with breakfast preparations. "I thought we might ride along the river before heading to town," he suggested as he worked. "See if any of your belongings washed up somewhere recoverable." "I would appreciate that," Willow said. "I hate to think of losing everything, especially my mother's locket and my father's books. They're all I have left of them." After a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush with honey and coffee, they set out. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Owen had lent Willow a pair of his boots, stuffed with rags to make them somewhat fit, and his spare coat against the morning chill. They rode double on Rusty, Willow sitting behind Owen this time, her hands lightly resting at his waist. They followed the river downstream, scanning the banks and shallow pools where debris often collected. About a mile from where Owen had pulled Willow from the water, they spotted something the corner of a trunk wedged between rocks in a calmer section of the river. "That's mine," Willow exclaimed, pointing. "My father's trunk." Owen dismounted and helped her down. "Stay here. The rocks are slippery." He made his way carefully to the edge of the water, testing each stone before putting his weight on it. The trunk was partially submerged but seemed intact, its brass fittings glinting in the sunlight. With considerable effort, Owen managed to free the trunk and drag it to shore. Water poured from its seams as he set it on dry land. Willow hurried over, kneeling beside it anxiously. "The lock's broken," she noted, lifting the lid cautiously. To her visible relief, the contents had survived relatively intact. The trunk had been well made. It seems tight enough to keep the worst of the water out. Books were damp around the edges but salvageable. Wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom were several framed photographs and a small jewelry box. "Oh, thank goodness," Willow breathed, opening the box to reveal a gold locket. She held it to her heart momentarily before tucking it safely into her pocket. "This means more than you can know." They searched further but found little else. A valise containing some sodden clothing and, curiously, a violin case that had somehow remained sealed against the water. Willow's face lit up at the sight of it. "My father's violin," she explained, opening the case to check the instrument. "It seems undamaged. Another miracle." They secured their findings to Rusty's saddle before continuing toward Rico. As they rode, Willow told Owen about her father, a bookkeeper by trade but a musician at heart, who had taught her to play as a child. She spoke of her mother's garden in St. Louis and the small school where Willow had taught for 2 years before her parents' illness had changed everything. "And what of you?" she asked as the town came into view in the distance. "You know my history now, but you've said little of your own." Owen was silent for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. "Not much to tell," he finally said. "I was a rancher's son in Wyoming, learned to work cattle, break horses. When my parents died, I drifted south, worked on different spreads until I saved enough to stake my own claim. That's all." Willow sensed there was far more to his story, but respected his reticence. They had known each other less than a day, after all, despite the strange intimacy forced upon them by circumstance. Rico was bustling when they arrived, the main street lined with false-fronted buildings typical of mining boomtowns. Freighters unloaded supplies at the livery, while miners and merchants went about their business. Several people nodded to Owen as they passed, though none approached a testament to his reputation as a man who kept to himself. Anderson's general store stood near the center of town, a 2-story clapboard building with a wide porch and large display windows. A bell jangled as Owen pushed open the door, Willow following close behind. The interior was dim after the bright morning sun, the air heavy with the mingled scents of coffee, leather, tobacco, and spices. A gray-haired man looked up from behind the counter, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Willow, my God, child, what happened to you?" He hurried around the counter, concern etched on his weathered face. "Uncle William," Willow said, accepting his embrace. "There was an accident with the wagon. The river washed out part of the road. If not for Mr. Yates here, I fear I would have drowned." William Anderson turned to Owen, extending his hand. "I'm deeply grateful, sir, more than I can express." Owen shook the offered hand briefly. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone would have succeeded," William countered. "The Animas is treacherous this time of year." He turned back to his niece. "Your things, mostly lost, I'm afraid," Willow said, "though Mr. Yates helped me recover a few important items." William nodded solemnly. "Things can be replaced, you cannot." He glanced between them, noting Willow's bedraggled appearance and Owen's protective stance. "You must tell me everything, but first, you need proper clothes and rest. We live above the store, simple accommodations, but comfortable enough." Owen shifted awkwardly. "I should be going." "Got chores waiting." "Nonsense," William insisted. "You must at least stay for a meal. It's the least we can offer in thanks." When Owen hesitated, the older man added, "I won't take no for an answer, young man. My wife Sarah makes the best chicken and dumplings this side of the Mississippi." Willow's eyes met Owen's, a silent plea in them. "Please stay," she said softly. "I owe you a proper thank you." Against his better judgment, Owen nodded. "I suppose I could stay for a meal." William beamed. "Excellent. Sarah will be delighted to meet you both. She's been preparing for your arrival for weeks, Willow." He gestured toward the back stairs. "Come, come." As they followed William upstairs, Owen couldn't help wondering what he'd gotten himself into. He'd planned to return Willow safely to her family and retreat back to his solitary existence. Now, somehow, he'd been drawn further into her world. What troubled him most was the realization that part of him didn't mind at all. Sarah Anderson proved to be a plump, cheerful woman who exclaimed in horror at Willow's tale of near drowning before whisking her away to bathe and change. Owen found himself left in the Andersons' modest but comfortable parlor with William, who poured them each a small glass of whiskey. "To your health, Mr. Yates," William said, raising his glass. "And to the remarkable coincidence that put you on that riverbank exactly when my niece needed you." Owen nodded, taking a small sip. The whiskey was good, better than what he normally afforded himself. "Just happened to be checking my traps downstream," he said. "Heard her before I saw her." William studied him over the rim of his glass. "You don't strike me as a man who believes in coincidence." "I believe in keeping my eyes open," Owen replied evenly. "The rest is just talk." William smiled. "Fair enough." He settled into an armchair, gesturing for Owen to take the other. "Sarah and I never had children of our own. Willow is the daughter of my younger brother Henry. When we heard about his and Martha's passing, we immediately wrote to offer Willow a home here." "She mentioned she was a teacher," Owen said, uncertain why he was engaging in this conversation but finding himself curious nonetheless. "Yes, and by all accounts, an excellent one." William's expression grew somber. "But there were circumstances that made it impossible for her to remain in St. Louis. A situation with the school's headmaster, a married man who took too keen an interest in her. When she rebuffed him, he made certain her reputation suffered." Owen's jaw tightened. "That why she came west, running from gossip, running from injustice," William corrected. "Willow is strong-spirited like her mother was. She stood up to the man, which only made matters worse. In the end, leaving seemed the wisest course." He sighed. "She's had more than her share of hardship this past year. Losing her parents, her position, and now nearly her life in that river." The conversation halted as Sarah returned, announcing that dinner would be ready soon and that Willow was resting but would join them shortly. William changed the subject to cattle prices and local news, but Owen found his thoughts drifting to what he'd learned about Willow. It explained the wariness he'd sensed in her, the careful dignity she maintained even in distress. When Willow finally appeared for dinner, Owen barely recognized her. Gone were the muddy, crumpled clothes and tangled hair. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the green of her eyes, her auburn hair neatly braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. She looked younger, somehow, yet also more composed. "Mr. Yates," she said with a warm smile. "I'm glad you stayed." Dinner was a more elaborate affair than Owen was accustomed to. Sarah Anderson proved to be an excellent cook, and the conversation flowed easily as William shared town news and Sarah peppered Willow with questions about her journey. Owen said little, content to observe the family dynamics. Despite having just arrived, Willow already seemed to fit naturally into their household. "Mr. Yates runs cattle up in the foothills," William explained to his wife. "Has that small silver claim too, if I recall correctly?" "Just enough silver to keep me in ammunition and coffee," Owen acknowledged. "The cattle are my real living." 20 head, you said?" William asked. When Owen nodded, he continued thoughtfully. "Not a large herd, but good stock from what I've seen come through. You ever consider expanding?" Owen shrugged. "Been thinking on it. Land's not the problem, I've got grazing rights to plenty, but capital for more breeding stock is another matter." "Perhaps we could discuss a business arrangement," William suggested. "The store does well enough, and I've been looking for investment opportunities beyond Rico. Mining's boom and bust, as we all know, but people always need beef." Owen was taken aback by the offer. "That's generous, but not generosity," William interrupted. "Good business sense. Think on it." No need to decide tonight. After dinner, Sarah insisted on showing Willow to her room to rest, leaving the men to their conversation. Eventually, Owen stood to take his leave, uncomfortable with how easily he'd been drawn into the Andersons' world. "I should head back before dark," he said, reaching for his hat. William walked him downstairs to the store. "The offer stands, Mr. Yates, and you're welcome here any time, business or otherwise." At the door, Owen was surprised to find Willow waiting. She'd evidently slipped away from her aunt's fussing to catch him before he left. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much, just some coffee and tobacco from the store," Uncle William insisted. Owen accepted the package awkwardly. "Wasn't necessary, but thank you." Willow stepped closer, her voice dropping. "I also wanted to say, yesterday meant more to me than I can express. Not just the rescue, but your kindness afterward. I won't forget it." Before Owen could respond, she leaned forward and placed a quick, soft kiss on his cheek. "Good night, Mr. Yates." Then she was gone, disappearing back up the stairs, leaving Owen standing in the doorway with the package in his hands and the ghost of her touch on his skin. The ride back to his cabin seemed longer than usual. His thoughts occupied with green eyes, auburn hair, and the strange turns of fate that had brought Willow Anderson into his life. Over the next few weeks, Owen found himself inventing reasons to visit Rico. He needed supplies, he told himself the first time. The second visit, he claimed he was considering William Anderson's business proposal. By the third visit, he stopped making excuses altogether and simply acknowledged, if only to himself, that he wanted to see Willow again. For her part, Willow had settled quickly into life in Rico. The townsfolk had welcomed her warmly, especially after hearing the dramatic tale of her rescue. She proved adept at running the store, her organizational skills and neat handwriting improving William's somewhat haphazard bookkeeping. In the evenings, she often played her father's violin, drawing small crowds to the store's porch on warm nights. Owen found himself lingering in town longer each visit, first accepting invitations to dinner, then staying to listen to Willow play. They talked more freely now, their initial reserve giving way to a comfortable familiarity. Owen learned that Willow loved poetry and could quote Whitman from memory. She discovered that, beneath his taciturn exterior, Owen possessed a dry wit and surprising knowledge of botany, a hobby he'd picked up from his mother. Spring gave way to early summer, the mountains exploding with wildflowers and the days growing longer. On one such day in late June, Owen arrived in Rico to find the store unusually busy. "Independence Day preparations," William explained when Owen finally reached the counter. "Everyone's stocking up for the celebration next week." "Celebration," Owen echoed, unfamiliar with the town's customs. "Oh yes, Sarah chimed in, wrapping packages for a waiting customer. Rico does Independence Day properly. Parade, picnic, dancing in the evening. You'll come, of course. It wasn't really a question. Owen had learned that Sarah Anderson's invitations were essentially gentle commands. Before he could formulate a response, Willow appeared from the storeroom, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Owen, I was hoping you'd come today." She carried a crate of canned goods, which he immediately took from her arms despite her protests. "Thank you. Those go on the shelf by the window." As they worked together to stock the shelves, Willow told him about the upcoming celebration. "Uncle William says it's quite something the whole town turns out. There's even a band coming from Durango." "Not really one for crowds," Owen admitted. Willow's smile dimmed slightly. "Oh. Well, of course, you needn't feel obligated." Something in her expression made Owen reconsider. "I didn't say I wouldn't come, just that crowds aren't my usual preference." He hesitated, then added, "But good company might make it worthwhile." The smile returned to Willow's face, brighter than before. "Then I hope you'll find the company agreeable enough to attend." Their conversation was interrupted by a customer needing assistance. But something had shifted between them, a subtle acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that day by the river. Later, as Owen prepared to leave, William drew him aside to discuss business. The older man had been true to his word about investing in Owen's cattle operation. They'd drawn up a formal agreement the previous week, with William providing capital for Owen to purchase additional breeding stock. "The first heifers should arrive next month," William said, reviewing their ledger. "Just in time for the late summer grazing. You're sure your cabin can withstand another winter? With the expanded herd, you'll need more substantial quarters." "Been meaning to add on," Owen acknowledged. "Got the timber cut already, just need to find the time." "Well, don't wait too long," William advised. "Mountain winters are unforgiving to man and beast alike." As they concluded their business, William fixed Owen with a thoughtful look. "You'll be at the Independence Day celebration, I trust. Willow's been asked to play her violin with the band." "Wouldn't miss it," Owen replied, surprising himself with his certainty. William nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. "Good. Very good." The 4th of July dawned clear and promising, with barely a cloud marring the brilliant blue Colorado sky. Owen spent the morning on chores, determined to complete a full day's work before heading to town for the celebration. He bathed in the cold creek behind his cabin, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt, a dark blue cotton he normally saved for trips to Denver. As he saddled Rusty for the ride to Rico, Owen caught himself whistling something he rarely did. The realization made him pause. When had his outlook changed so dramatically? For 3 years, he'd embraced solitude, convinced it was safer than risking his heart again. Yet somehow, without conscious decision, he'd begun to emerge from his self-imposed isolation. The answer came unbidden, since pulling a half-drowned woman from the Animas River. Since Willow Anderson had looked at him with grateful green eyes, and something in his chest had shifted, like a key turning in a long, rusted lock. Rico was transformed when he arrived. American flags hung from every building along the main street. Bunting draped the boardwalks, and a platform had been erected in the town square for speeches and later, dancing. Children ran about with pinwheels and small flags, their excitement palpable. Owen made his way to Anderson's store, where he found Sarah arranging a display of patriotic ribbons. She greeted him warmly, exclaiming over how presentable he looked, which Owen took as high praise. "Willow's upstairs getting ready," Sarah informed him. "William's with the town committee making final arrangements. Why don't you wait in the parlor? Willow shouldn't be long." Owen had barely settled himself when he heard light footsteps on the stairs. He turned to find Willow entering the room, and for the second time since they'd met, he barely recognized her. She wore a dress of deep green that matched her eyes, its cut more fashionable than her usual practical attire. Her auburn hair was styled more elaborately than usual, with a small spray of white flowers tucked into the arrangement. "You look," Owen began, then faltered, finding himself uncharacteristically lost for words. "Too much?" Willow asked anxiously. "Aunt Sarah insisted on the flowers, and this dress was my mother's. We altered it to fit beautiful," Owen finished. "You look beautiful." A blush colored Willow's cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." She gestured to his blue shirt. "That color suits you." They stood awkwardly for a moment before Owen remembered himself and offered his arm. "Shall we join the festivities?" The day passed in a blur of activity. There were speeches from the mayor and other town dignitaries, followed by a community picnic, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by Rico's families. Children competed in sack races and egg-carrying contests while their parents socialized. Owen found himself more at ease than he'd expected, particularly with Willow by his side to navigate the social niceties. In the afternoon, the Durango band set up on the platform, and Willow joined them with her violin. Owen watched, transfixed, as she played, her face transformed with joy as the music flowed from her instrument. The crowd applauded enthusiastically after each piece, and Owen felt an unexpected surge of pride seeing how respected and liked she had become in such a short time. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit throughout the square, creating a magical atmosphere. The band began playing waltzes and reels, and couples took to the wooden dance floor that had been laid for the occasion. "May I have this dance?" Owen asked when Willow returned to his side after her performance. Surprise flickered across her face. "I didn't know you danced." "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," Owen replied with a small smile. "I'm not promising grace, but I can follow a basic waltz without trampling your toes." Willow laughed, a sound that had become one of Owen's favorite things in the world. "Then, I accept with pleasure." He led her onto the dance floor, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk who had never seen the reclusive rancher participate in such festivities before. But as the music began and Willow moved into his arms, everyone else faded into the background. They moved together surprisingly well, Owen's natural physical confidence translating adequately to the dance floor. He wasn't polished, but he was steady and sure in his movements. "You've been holding out on me, Mr. Yates," Willow teased as they turned about the floor. "You dance quite well for a man who claims to avoid social gatherings." "My mother insisted all her children learn," Owen admitted. "Said a man never knows when such skills might prove useful." "A wise woman," Willow said softly. "She was," Owen agreed, his expression momentarily distant with memory. As they continued to dance, Owen became increasingly aware of Willow's hand in his, the light pressure of his other hand at her waist, the subtle floral scent of her hair. He found himself holding her slightly closer than propriety strictly dictated, though not enough to raise eyebrows. "I'm glad you came today," Willow said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." Owen's heart beat faster at her words. "I'm glad I came too," he replied honestly. "Happier than I expected to be." When the music ended, they remained standing close for a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them. Then Willow was called away by friends, and Owen retreated to the edge of the gathering, watching her interact easily with the townsfolk. William Anderson appeared at his side, offering a glass of punch. "She fits in well here," he observed, following Owen's gaze. "Better than I dared hope." Owen nodded. "She has a way about her. People respond to her kindness." Indeed they do, William agreed, giving Owen a sidelong glance. Some more than others, I've noticed. Owen shifted uncomfortably, unused to having his feelings so transparent. William chuckled at his discomfort. No need to look so alarmed, son. Sarah and I have eyes. We see how you look at our niece and how she looks at you when she thinks no one's watching. Before Owen could formulate a response, a commotion at the edge of the square drew their attention. A group of miners had arrived from one of the outlying camps, already well into their cups and looking for entertainment. Trouble, William muttered. Jackson and his crew. They work the Blue Eagle mine up north. Rough bunch. The miners made their way to the refreshment table, helping themselves liberally to the punch, which Owen suspected they were enhancing with their own liquor. Their loud laughter and crude jokes drew disapproving looks from the family-minded townsfolk. Owen tensed when he noticed one of the miners, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a vivid scar across his jaw, watching Willow with obvious interest. The man nudged his companions, making some remark that caused them to laugh and look in her direction. When the band started up again, the miner made his way directly to Willow, intercepting her before she could rejoin Owen. "Dance with me, pretty lady," he said, his voice carrying across the square. He reached for Willow's arm, his movement overly familiar. Owen saw Willow stiffen, taking a step back. "No, thank you," she said firmly. The miner scowled. "Come on now, don't be unfriendly. Just one dance." He reached for her again. Owen was moving before he consciously decided to intervene. He stepped between them, his hand catching the miner's wrist before it could touch Willow again. "The lady declined," Owen said quietly, his voice level but with steel beneath it. "I suggest you respect her wishes." The miner Jackson presumably looked Owen up and down, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "This ain't your business, cowboy." "I'm making it my business," Owen replied evenly, still holding the man's wrist. He could smell the whiskey on Jackson's breath and knew this could turn ugly fast. "Why don't you go enjoy the refreshments and leave the lady be?" For a tense moment, it seemed Jackson might push the issue. His free hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. But something in Owen's steady gaze, and perhaps the fact that several other men from town had begun moving in their direction, made him reconsider. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway," Jackson muttered, yanking his wrist from Owen's grip. "Plenty of friendlier women in Durango." He backed away, rejoining his companions with a scowl. The incident hadn't drawn too much attention from the general crowd, but Owen noticed William and the sheriff watching carefully from across the square. "Are you all right?" Owen asked Willow, turning to her with concern. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Yes, thank you for intervening. There was something unsettling about that man." "Jackson has a reputation," Owen said grimly. "Works the Blue Eagle mine when he's not causing trouble. Sheriffs run him in more than once for brawling." Willow shivered despite the warm evening. "He reminded me of someone, from St. Louis." She didn't elaborate, but Owen recalled what William had told him about the school headmaster who had harassed her. "He won't bother you again," Owen assured her, resisting the urge to put a protective arm around her in public. "Not if he values his health." Willow looked up at him, her expression softening. "My gallant rescuer once again," she said, her attempt at lightness not quite masking the genuine gratitude in her voice. "You do seem to have a habit of coming to my aid in times of trouble." "Just happened to be in the right place," Owen said with a self-deprecating shrug. "I don't believe in such coincidences anymore," Willow replied, her gaze holding his. "Do you?" Before Owen could answer, the first fireworks exploded overhead, drawing gasps and cheers from the crowd. The brilliant bursts of color illuminated Willow's upturned face as she watched the display, her earlier distress forgotten in the moment of wonder. Without thinking, Owen took her hand in his. She didn't pull away, instead twining her fingers with his as they stood together in the darkness, watching the sky bloom with light. In that moment, Owen knew with absolute clarity that the careful solitude he had built for himself was crumbling, and he had no desire to shore up the walls. The summer days passed in a new rhythm for Owen. He still tended his cattle and worked his land, but he found himself in Rico 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes on legitimate business with William, often simply to see Willow. They developed a routine of sorts. He would arrive mid-afternoon, help with any heavy lifting needed at the store, then join the Andersons for dinner. Afterward, if the evening was fine, he and Willow might walk through town or sit on the porch while she played her violin. In August, when the new breeding stock arrived, Willow rode out to his cabin with William to see the cattle. Owen had spent the preceding weeks adding a proper bedroom to his cabin and enlarging the main room, improvements that didn't escape William's approving notice. Planning for the future. The older man asked while Willow was examining the new heifers with unexpected interest. Owen followed his gaze to the cabin improvements. Just needed more space, he said noncommittally, though they both knew it was more than that. September brought the first hints of fall to the mountains, the aspen trees beginning their spectacular transformation to gold. The air carried a crispness that warned of the coming winter. Owen threw himself into preparations, stacking firewood, repairing fences, ensuring his expanded herd would have adequate shelter when the snow came. One clear afternoon, he rode into Rico to find the town in an unusual state of excitement. A wagon stood outside the general store, surrounded by curious onlookers. Inside, he found Willow practically dancing with joy as she examined a large wooden crate. "Owen," she exclaimed when she saw him. "Look what's arrived. Uncle William ordered it weeks ago as a surprise." The crate contained a piano, not a grand instrument, but a respectable upright that had made the difficult journey from Denver relatively unscathed. 2 men were already preparing to move it upstairs to the Andersons' parlor. "Now you can play both violin and piano again," William said, beaming at his niece's happiness. "Sarah's been complaining about the lack of music in the evenings." Owen helped the men navigate the narrow staircase with the heavy instrument. Once it was positioned to everyone's satisfaction in the parlor, Willow sat at the keyboard, her fingers hovering reverently over the ivory keys before she began to play. The music that filled the room was unlike anything Owen had heard from her violin, richer, more complex, filling the space with emotion. He stood transfixed as Willow played from memory, her eyes closed, swaying slightly with the melody. When she finished, the small audience that had gathered applauded enthusiastically. "That was beautiful," Owen said when the others had dispersed, leaving them alone in the parlor. "I didn't know you played so well." Willow smiled up at him from the piano bench. "My mother taught me first, then I had lessons in St. Louis. I've missed it terribly." Her fingers traced the keys lightly. "Music has always been my greatest comfort in difficult times." Owen nodded, understanding. Everyone had their refuges for him. It had been the solitude of the mountains. For Willow, it was music. "Would you like to learn?" she asked suddenly. "Learn what?" "To play," Willow clarified, patting the space beside her on the bench. "Just a simple tune. It's never too late to start." Owen hesitated, then sat beside her, acutely aware of their shoulders touching. "I'm not sure these hands are made for piano keys," he said, looking down at his calloused, work-roughened fingers. "Nonsense," Willow replied, taking his right hand and positioning it on the keyboard. "Like this, fingers curved, wrist relaxed." She guided him through a simple melody, her smaller hand occasionally covering his to demonstrate the proper technique. Owen found himself less focused on the notes than on the warmth of her touch and the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair. When he hit a particularly discordant note, Willow laughed. "Perhaps we should start with something even simpler," she teased. Owen turned to respond and found her face inches from his own, her eyes bright with humor and something deeper. The laughter faded from her expression as their gazes held, replaced by a look of expectation mixed with uncertainty. Later, Owen would never be sure which of them moved first. He only knew that one moment they were sitting side by side at the piano, and the next his lips were meeting hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Willow responded with a softness that made his heart race, her hand coming up to rest lightly against his chest. The kiss deepened briefly before they both pulled back, slightly breathless and startled by their own boldness. "I've been wanting to do that for some time," Owen admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been hoping you would," Willow confessed, a blush coloring her cheeks. They might have kissed again if not for the sound of footsteps on the stairs, warning them of Sarah's approach. They moved apart, Willow turning back to the piano keys while Owen stood and moved to the window, attempting to compose his features into something less revealing. Sarah appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of coffee and cookies. If she noticed their flushed faces and careful distance from each other, she gave no indication. "I thought you might like some refreshments after all that moving and playing," she said cheerfully. "Owen, will you stay for dinner? William's expecting a shipment of new boots on the afternoon stage, and he'd appreciate your help unloading them." "I'd be happy to stay," Owen replied, finding his voice steadier than he expected. He glanced at Willow, who was studiously examining the sheet music on the piano but couldn't quite hide her smile. That evening, as Owen rode back to his cabin under a sky blazing with stars, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The kiss had changed everything, and nothing merely acknowledging what they had both felt growing between them for months. Yet in that acknowledgement lay both exhilaration and fear. Loving someone meant risking loss, a lesson Owen had learned painfully in his past. But as he looked up at the vast Colorado sky, he knew it was too late for caution. His heart had already made its choice, regardless of the risks. The following Sunday, Owen dressed in his best clothes and rode into Rico earlier than usual. He found William alone in the store, taking inventory while Sarah and Willow attended church services. "Need to speak with you," Owen said without preamble after ensuring no customers were within earshot. William looked up from his ledger, a knowing expression crossing his face. "I was wondering when we'd have this conversation," he said, setting down his pencil. "Come to the office." In the small room behind the main store, William gestured for Owen to sit, then pulled out a bottle of good whiskey and 2 glasses from a drawer. "This seems like the kind of talk that might benefit from a little fortification," he said, pouring a finger of amber liquid into each glass. Owen accepted the drink but didn't immediately speak, gathering his thoughts. William waited patiently, seeming to understand the importance of the moment. "I have feelings for your niece," Owen finally said, looking the older man directly in the eye. "Serious feelings. I'd like your permission to court her properly." William nodded slowly. "I suspected as much, and Willow, does she return these feelings?" "I believe she does," Owen replied, thinking of their kiss at the piano and the countless small moments of connection they'd shared over the past months. "But I wouldn't presume to speak for her." "No, you wouldn't," William agreed, approval in his tone. "That's one of the things I like about you, Owen. You respect her as a person, not just as a woman to be won." He took a sip of his whiskey, considering. "What are your intentions, ultimately? Willow's had enough disappointment in her life. I won't see her hurt again." Owen straightened in his chair. My intentions are honorable. If things continue as they have been, I'd hope to make her my wife with her consent, of course, and your blessing. And the practical matters. Your cabin is remote, your lifestyle solitary. Willow's found community here in Rico, built a new life after losing so much. Have you considered what you're asking her to give up? It was a fair question, one that had troubled Owen's thoughts. I have, he acknowledged. I don't expect her to simply adapt to my way of life. I'm willing to change mine. The cabin's being expanded. I could build a proper house, closer to town if that's what she wanted. William nodded thoughtfully. And your past. There's something there that drove you to isolation, Owen. I've never pried, but if you're to be part of Willow's life, I need to know you're not carrying burdens that will ultimately harm her. Owen set down his glass, his expression grave. There was a woman in Wyoming, Emily. We were to be married. He paused, the old pain rising to the surface. There was a diphtheria outbreak in the town. She was helping nurse the sick. She caught it herself and died 3 days before our wedding. William's face softened with sympathy. I'm truly sorry, Owen. After that, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories. I drifted south, convinced myself I was better off alone. Owen looked down at his hands. For 3 years, that seemed true enough, until I pulled Willow from that river. And now I know that hiding from life isn't living at all, Owen said with quiet conviction. I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me or to Willow. Life doesn't offer those guarantees, but I can promise to cherish every day we might have together, to protect her as best I can, and to love her with everything I am. William was silent for a long moment, studying the younger man. Finally, he extended his hand across the desk. You have my blessing to court my niece, Owen Yates, and if the time comes that you wish to ask for her hand, you'll have that blessing too, provided she's of the same mind. Owen shook William's hand, relief and gratitude washing through him. Thank you, sir. But, William added with a hint of mischief, I suggest you direct your courting energies toward Willow herself. She has a strong mind of her own, and my blessing won't count for much if you can't win hers. Owen nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. I'm counting on that strong mind. It's one of the things I admire most about her. When Willow and Sarah returned from church, they found the men sitting companionably in the store, discussing the latest silver prices as if they hadn't just had one of the most important conversations of Owen's life. Later, as they walked together after Sunday dinner, Owen asked Willow if she would accompany him on a picnic the following Saturday. A picnic, she repeated, surprised by the formal invitation after months of casual visits. Yes, there's a place I'd like to show you, Owen said. Up in the foothills, the aspens will be turning and the view is spectacular. Willow studied his face, sensing something significant in the invitation. I'd love to, she said softly. Should I pack the food or will you? I'll provide everything, Owen assured her, then added with a self-deprecating smile, though I can't promise my cooking will match your aunt's. I'm sure it will be perfect, Willow replied, her hand finding his as they continued their walk through the quiet Sunday streets of Rico. Saturday dawned clear and cool, ideal weather for a ride into the mountains. Owen arrived at the store mid-morning, leading not only Rusty but also a gentle mare he'd borrowed from a neighbor. For you, he explained to Willow. She's even tempered and sure-footed on mountain trails. Willow approached the mare confidently, stroking her velvety nose. She's beautiful. Does she have a name? Daisy, Owen replied, because of the white marking on her forehead. Willow was dressed practically for the ride in a divided skirt that Sarah had helped her alter for horseback riding, with a warm jacket against the autumn chill. Her hair was braided simply down her back, and she wore sturdy boots instead of her usual town shoes. They rode out of Rico, heading northeast, following a trail that wound gradually upward into the foothills. The aspens were indeed turning, creating patches of brilliant gold among the dark green pines. The air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of pine and fallen leaves. Owen led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming distant peaks. Willow proved to be a competent rider, sitting her horse with natural grace and evident enjoyment. "You ride well," Owen observed during a brief rest to water the horses at a small stream. Willow smiled. "My father insisted I learn as a girl. He said a person never knows when such skills might prove useful." Her deliberate echo of Owen's explanation of his dancing ability made them both laugh. By early afternoon, they reached their destination, a small meadow perched on a natural shelf in the mountainside. From this vantage point, the view was breathtaking. The San Juan Mountains rising majestically to the north, the valley spread out below them with Rico visible as a tiny cluster of buildings, and the ribbon of the Animas River winding through it all. "Oh, Owen," Willow breathed, dismounting to take in the panorama. "It's magnificent." "I found this place my first year here," Owen said, securing the horses to a nearby pine before unloading the picnic supplies from his saddlebags. "I come here sometimes to think, never brought anyone else before." The significance of his statement wasn't lost on Willow. She helped him spread a blanket on the grass, her movements betraying a new awareness between them, a tension that was anticipatory rather than uncomfortable. Owen had indeed prepared everything: cold chicken, bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of wine that must have cost more than he typically spent on himself in a month. They ate sitting side by side, conversation flowing easily between periods of comfortable silence as they enjoyed the view and each other's company. After they'd finished eating, Owen reached into his saddlebag one last time and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "It's not much, but—" He handed her the bundle. Willow unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicately carved wooden box. The lid featured an intricate design of wildflowers, columbines, Indian paintbrush, and lupines rendered with remarkable skill and attention to detail. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Owen nodded. "Been working on it evenings. Open it." Willow lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, was a silver brooch in the shape of a violin. Simple but elegant, it caught the sunlight with a subtle gleam. "It's beautiful," she whispered, lifting it carefully. "Had it made in Durango," Owen explained. "The silversmith there does good work." Willow looked up at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, I'll treasure it always." Owen took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Willow, I need to tell you something." He took her hands in his, the brooch still clasped between them. "These past months since pulling you from that river have changed everything for me. I've been alone by choice for a long time. Thought that was safer, easier. I was wrong." Willow's eyes never left his face as he continued, his voice growing more confident with each word. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your kindness, your music, the way you face the world despite everything it's thrown at you. I love watching you with the townsfolk, with your aunt and uncle. I love seeing Rico through your eyes." He paused, his thumbs gently stroking the backs of her hands. "I'm not asking for promises yet. Just a chance to court you properly, with your uncle's blessing, which I've already sought and received." Tears had gathered in Willow's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Owen Yates," she said, her voice steady despite her emotion. "For a man of few words, you certainly found the right ones just now." She leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in answer. This kiss was different from their first, still gentle, but with a certainty that hadn't been there before. Owen's arms went around her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, expressing what words alone couldn't convey. When they finally parted, Willow rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you pulled me from that river and told me to hold tight, that you had me. No one had had me like that in a very long time, not since my parents died. You made me feel safe when everything was falling apart." Owen kissed her again, brief but tender. "I'll always try to make you feel safe," he promised. "But I know you're strong enough to weather whatever comes, with or without me. That's part of what I love about you." They spent the remainder of the afternoon on the mountainside, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and simply enjoying the perfect day and the new understanding between them. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the meadow, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride back to Rico. The trail down was shadowed now, the forest taking on the mysterious quality of approaching evening. They rode single file, with Owen leading the way through the narrowest parts of the path. Neither spoke much, each wrapped in their own thoughts and the comfortable silence of shared happiness. They were perhaps halfway back to town when Owen reined in suddenly, raising a hand for Willow to stop. His posture had changed, alert and tense. "What is it?" Willow asked in a hushed voice, sensing his concern. "Not sure," Owen replied, scanning the trail ahead. "Thought I saw something move." Before he could finish, a figure stepped onto the path 50 yards ahead, a man with a rifle pointed directly at them. Two more men emerged from the trees, similarly armed. "Well, well," called a familiar voice that sent a chill down Willow's spine. "Fancy meeting you folks out here." Owen cursed under his breath as he recognized Jackson, the miner from the Independence Day celebration, flanked by two companions. The trio blocked the narrow trail completely, their intentions clearly hostile. "Evening, Jackson," Owen said calmly, though his hand had moved to rest near his own sidearm. "Trail's wide enough for us all to pass," Jackson sneered. "Don't think we're interested in just passing, Yates." His gaze shifted to Willow, his expression making her skin crawl. "Been watching you two lovebirds. Thought you might be carrying cash after your meeting with old Anderson this morning." Owen's mind raced. The men had obviously been following them, perhaps planning this ambush all day. They must have seen him at the general store where he'd collected the payment for 2 steers he'd sold the previous week, money now in his pocket. "Just out for a ride," Owen said evenly. "No business today." Jackson laughed, an ugly sound that echoed in the quiet forest. "Don't lie to me, Cowboy. Anderson's been throwing money at you for months. Everyone in town's talking about it." Willow sat rigid on her horse, fear and anger warring within her. These men didn't just want Owen's money. The way Jackson looked at her made his other intentions clear. "Whatever you're thinking, Jackson, it's not worth the trouble," Owen said, his voice hard now. "Sheriff Miller won't look kindly on robbing folks on public trails. Sheriff's busy with a situation in Durango," one of Jackson's companions said with a grin. "Won't be back till tomorrow." Owen shifted slightly, positioning his horse to better shield Willow. "Last chance to walk away," he warned. "I've got no quarrel with you, but I won't let you threaten the lady." Jackson's expression darkened. "Always the hero, ain't you, Yates? Always thinking you're better than the likes of us." He raised his rifle higher. "Throw down your gun and whatever money you're carrying. Then we might let you walk away, though the lady stays with us for a while." Everything happened at once. Owen drew and fired in one fluid motion, hitting Jackson's rifle and sending it spinning from his hands. Willow's mare reared in fright at the gunshot, nearly unseating her. The other two men raised their weapons, but Owen was already moving, spurring Rusty forward while drawing Willow's horse alongside. "Ride!" he shouted, and they plunged off the trail into the trees as bullets splintered bark around them. The forest was dense with aspens and pines, forcing them to weave between trunks at dangerous speed. Behind them, they could hear shouts and crashing undergrowth as their pursuers gave chase. Owen led them sharply uphill, away from the main trail, using his knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. "There's a creek ahead," he called to Willow over his shoulder. "We'll cross it and head for the ridge. Harder to track us there." Willow nodded, concentrating on staying mounted as branches whipped past her face. The daylight was fading rapidly now, the forest floor already in deep shadow. It would be dark soon, an advantage if they could put enough distance between themselves and Jackson's gang first. They splashed across the shallow creek and continued climbing. The horses were breathing hard now, the steep terrain taxing even for animals accustomed to mountain trails. Owen finally reined in when they reached a small clearing near the ridgeline, listening intently for sounds of pursuit. "I think we've lost them for now," he said after a moment. "They won't know these back routes like I do." Willow was trembling, both from exertion and delayed reaction to the danger. "What do we do now? We can't go back to the main trail." Owen considered their options. "We're closer to my cabin than town now. We'll head there, wait till morning to notify the sheriff." He looked at her with concern. "Are you all right to keep riding? It's another hour at least." Willow straightened her spine, drawing on inner reserves of strength. "I'm fine, let's go." They continued at a slower pace, picking their way carefully through the gathering darkness. Owen knew these mountains intimately, navigating by landmarks and instinct where the trail was indistinct. The moon rose, providing just enough light to see by once their eyes adjusted. When they finally reached Owen's cabin, both were exhausted and chilled from the night air. Owen quickly ushered Willow inside, then returned to tend to the horses, making sure they were securely stabled in case they needed a quick escape. Inside, he built up the fire while Willow sank gratefully into a chair. The expanded cabin was more comfortable than when she'd first stayed there after her river rescue, with the new bedroom and additional furnishings giving it a more settled feel. "Here," Owen said, handing her a cup of whiskey. "For the shock." Willow took a small sip, grimacing at the burn but appreciating the warmth that spread through her chest. "Do you think they'll come here?" Owen shook his head. "Doubtful. They won't know where we went, and Jackson's not the type for a long pursuit. More likely they'll head back to their camp to lick their wounds." He checked his revolver before setting it within easy reach. "But I'll keep watch, just in case." As the warmth of the fire and the whiskey began to thaw her, Willow's thoughts turned to their interrupted afternoon. "Some first courting outing," she said with a weak attempt at humor. "Do all your romantic picnics end with gunfire?" Owen's expression softened as he knelt beside her chair. "Only the ones with you, it seems. You do have a knack for finding trouble." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Are you sure you want to tie yourself to a man who seems to attract such excitement?" Willow leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "More certain than ever," she whispered. "You kept us safe. Again." Owen's arms went around her, holding her close as the tension of the past hours finally released in silent tears against his shoulder. He murmured soothing words, stroking her hair until she grew calm again. "You should rest," he said eventually. "Take the bedroom. I'll keep watch out here." Willow hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to be alone right now," she admitted. Owen nodded understanding. "I'll stay right here," he promised, moving a chair near the bedroom door. "Close enough to hear if you need anything, but giving you privacy." This arrangement seemed to satisfy Willow. She retired to the bedroom, leaving the door ajar. Owen settled into the chair, rifle across his knees, listening to the night sounds outside the cabin and Willow's eventual steady breathing as she fell into exhausted sleep. Despite his intention to remain vigilant, Owen must have dozed off at some point. He woke with a start as early dawn light filtered through the cabin windows. For a moment, he was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous day with a rush of concern. He rose quickly to check outside, but the clearing around the cabin was peaceful, showing no signs of intruders. He was stoking the fire to prepare coffee when Willow emerged from the bedroom. She had clearly attempted to tidy her appearance, her hair neatly rebraided, though her riding clothes were rumpled from sleep. "Good morning," she said, her voice steadier than he expected. "Any sign of trouble?" Owen shook his head. "All quiet. How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Willow admitted. "Your cabin feels safe somehow." They shared a simple breakfast of coffee and cornbread, discussing their plan for the day. Owen would ride into Rico to alert the sheriff about Jackson's ambush, while Willow would remain at the cabin. "I don't like leaving you alone," Owen said, frowning. "I'll be fine," Willow assured him. "You said yourself they're unlikely to come here, and I know how to use a rifle if necessary." At his surprised look, she smiled. "Another skill my father thought useful. I'm not as good a shot as you, but I can defend myself if needed." Owen kissed her before he left, a lingering kiss that conveyed everything he couldn't put into words: his worry, his pride in her courage, and his deepening love. "I'll be back by midday," he promised. "Bar the door behind me." The ride to Rico was uneventful. Owen remained vigilant, taking a different route than their usual trail, but saw no sign of Jackson or his companions. In town, he went directly to the sheriff's office, relieved to find Sheriff Miller had indeed returned from Durango. The lawman listened gravely to Owen's account of the ambush. "Been meaning to deal with Jackson for months," he said, checking his revolver before buckling on his gun belt. "This gives me cause to bring him in. I'll gather a few deputies and head up to the Blue Eagle camp." "I'll go with you," Owen offered. Miller shook his head. "Better if you don't. Go see to Miss Anderson. Her aunt and uncle have been worried sick when she didn't return last night. I sent word first thing that you two were likely delayed, but they'll want to see her safe." After explaining the situation to William and Sarah, who were predictably alarmed but relieved to hear Willow was safe at his cabin, Owen collected fresh supplies before heading back into the hills. He was perhaps halfway home when he heard a gunshot echo through the mountains. His heart lurched. The sound had come from the direction of his cabin. Spurring Rusty to a gallop, Owen covered the remaining distance at dangerous speed, branches whipping past his face as he took the most direct route possible. As he approached the cabin clearing, he slowed, drawing his revolver. Everything appeared quiet, too quiet. No smoke rose from the chimney, though the morning was cool enough to warrant a fire. "Willow," he called, approaching cautiously. The cabin door stood partially open. Owen's blood ran cold at the sight. He dismounted, moving silently to the side of the building where he could see through a window before entering. The interior was in disarray, chairs overturned, his few possessions scattered. There was no sign of Willow. Owen entered carefully, gun raised, though his instincts told him the intruders were gone. On the table lay a folded piece of paper, held down by his own hunting knife stabbed through the wood. With dread coiling in his gut, Owen unfolded the crude note. "Got your woman. Want her back. Bring $500 to Bear Creek Mine tomorrow noon. Come alone or she dies." The note was unsigned, but Owen had no doubt who had written it. Jackson had found them after all, perhaps followed him back from town, or simply gotten lucky in his search. Owen's first impulse was to ride immediately after them, but he forced himself to think strategically. Bear Creek was an abandoned mine 5 miles north, isolated, with multiple approaches and good vantage points for lookouts. Rushing in alone would likely get both him and Willow killed. With grim determination, Owen gathered what he needed: extra ammunition, water, food he could eat cold. He would return to Rico, but not to bring the sheriff. Miller and his deputies had already headed to the Blue Eagle camp, where they would find Jackson's men absent. No, Owen needed a different kind of help, and he knew exactly where to find it. 2 hours later, Owen stood in the back room of Rico's saloon with 3 men he trusted. Michael Harrington, a former cavalry scout who now ran the livery; Thomas Weber, who'd been a lawman in Kansas before coming west to try his hand at prospecting; and John Blackfeather, a Ute who worked as a guide for hunting parties but was really more at home in the mountains than any white man Owen had ever met. "Jackson's taken Willow," Owen explained tersely. "Wants ransom money tomorrow at Bear Creek Mine. Sheriff's gone to Blue Eagle looking for him." The men exchanged grim looks. All knew Jackson's reputation. "How many with him?" Harrington asked, already checking his revolver. "At least 2, based on yesterday's ambush," Owen replied. "Could be more at their camp." Weber nodded thoughtfully. "Bear Creek's got that high ridge to the east, good spot for a sharpshooter. And the old foreman's cabin behind the mine entrance," Blackfeather added. "Likely where they're holding her." They spent the next hour planning their approach. Owen would appear as demanded, with the money he'd hastily borrowed from William Anderson. Meanwhile, the others would take positions surrounding the mine. Weber on the eastern ridge with a rifle, Harrington covering the main trail, and Blackfeather approaching from the rear near the foreman's cabin. "We move at my signal," Owen insisted. "Willow's safety comes first. If something goes wrong, get her out, forget about me if necessary." The men nodded solemnly, understanding the stakes. Dawn the following day found them already in position. Owen had spent a sleepless night, his mind tormented by images of Willow in danger, afraid, possibly hurt. The only thing that kept him from rushing in recklessly was the knowledge that a careful plan offered her the best chance of survival. As noon approached, Owen rode openly down the trail to Bear Creek Mine, the saddlebags containing the ransom money clearly visible. The abandoned mine looked peaceful in the midday sun, its weathered timbers and rusted equipment standing like silent sentinels against the mountainside. "Jackson," Owen called, stopping in the clearing before the mine entrance. "I've brought what you asked for. Show me Willow's safe before we deal." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door of the foreman's cabin opened and Jackson appeared, pushing Willow ahead of him. Her hands were bound and she had a bruise on her cheek, but she was alive and standing on her own feet. Her eyes widened at the sight of Owen. "Let her go and the money's yours," Owen said, keeping his voice steady despite the rage that surged through him at the sight of Willow's injury. Jackson laughed. "Not how this works, cowboy. Throw down your gun first." Owen hesitated, then slowly complied, placing his revolver on the ground. "Now the money. Toss the bags over here." Again, Owen obeyed, though every instinct screamed against it. The saddlebags landed with a thud at Jackson's feet. "See, easy," Jackson said with a cruel smile. "Now we're just going to back away nice and slow," and he never finished the sentence. A shot rang out from the ridge, hitting the ground at Jackson's feet. In the moment of confusion that followed, Owen dove for his discarded weapon as Blackfeather emerged from behind the cabin, knife in hand. Willow, seizing the opportunity, drove her elbow hard into Jackson's stomach. He doubled over, losing his grip on her arm. She broke free, running toward Owen as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. One of Jackson's men appeared from inside the mine, firing wildly. A shot from Weber's position on the ridge took him down. Harrington engaged the third man in a brief but intense exchange of fire that ended with the outlaw slumping against a rusted ore cart. Jackson himself recovered quickly, raising his gun toward Willow's fleeing form. Owen fired twice in rapid succession, hitting Jackson in the shoulder and thigh. The outlaw went down hard, his weapon spinning away across the dirt. "It's over, Jackson," Owen said, advancing with his gun trained on the fallen man. "The sheriff will be interested to hear about your ransom scheme." Blackfeather had already cut Willow's bonds and was checking her for injuries beyond the visible bruise. Owen kept his focus on Jackson, not trusting himself to look at Willow, yet afraid that if he saw her hurt, his control might snap. "She's okay," Blackfeather reported. "Dehydrated, exhausted, but no serious harm." Only then did Owen turn. Willow stood shakily, supported by the youth's strong arm. Her eyes met Owen's, bright with unshed tears and relief. In 3 strides he reached her, holstering his weapon to gather her gently into his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "So sorry I left you." Willow clung to him, trembling. "You came for me. I knew you would." The cleanup took hours. Harrington rode to Rico to fetch the sheriff and a wagon for the prisoners. Jackson would live to stand trial, though his wounded pride seemed to pain him more than his injuries. His surviving companion was secured with him in the wagon, both men facing charges of kidnapping and attempted murder. By the time they returned to Rico, the whole town had heard about Willow's ordeal and rescue. A crowd gathered outside the general store as the Andersons fussed over their niece, insisting she see the doctor despite her protests that she was fine. Owen hung back, suddenly uncertain of his place now that the danger was past. He'd failed to protect her, if he hadn't left her alone. "Owen!" Willow's voice cut through his dark thoughts. She stood in the doorway of the store, having evidently slipped away from her aunt's ministrations. "Will you walk with me? Just to the church and back. I need some air." William appeared behind her, concern written on his face. "Willow, the doctor said you should rest." "And I will, Uncle, but first I need a few minutes with Owen." Her tone left no room for argument. William nodded reluctantly. "Just to the church and back," he agreed. "You've had more than enough excitement for one lifetime." They walked slowly down the street, Willow's arm linked through Owen's. Neither spoke until they reached the small white church at the end of the main street. There, in the shadow of the building, Willow turned to face him. "You're blaming yourself," she said directly. "I can see it in your face." Owen couldn't meet her eyes. "If I hadn't left you, then we both might have been captured or worse," Willow interrupted. "Owen, look at me." When he did, she continued firmly. "What happened wasn't your fault. Jackson was determined to hurt us both, and in the end, you saved me, you and your friends." "I put you in danger by bringing you into my life," Owen said, the fear he'd been holding at bay finally emerging. "First the river, then this. Maybe it's a sign." Willow's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Don't you dare use this as an excuse to push me away, Owen Yates. Life is dangerous. My parents died of illness in the safety of their own home. There are no guarantees for anyone." Her voice softened. "But I'd rather face whatever comes with you than be safe without you." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I love you. That hasn't changed because of Jackson or what happened. If anything, it's stronger. When they held me in that cabin, all I could think about was getting back to you, having another chance to tell you that." Owen's resistance crumbled. He pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her bruises, and kissed her with all the emotion he couldn't put into words: his fear, his relief, his overwhelming love. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Willow smiled up at him. "Now take me back to the store before Uncle William sends a search party, and then go home and get some rest yourself. We both need it." Owen nodded but didn't release her hand. "Willow," he said hesitantly, "when you're recovered, there's something I want to ask you, something important." Her smile widened, understanding in her eyes. "I'll look forward to it," she said softly. "And Owen?" "My answer will be yes." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Jackson and his accomplice were transported to Durango to await trial, the evidence against them overwhelming. The town gradually returned to its normal rhythm. Though Willow found herself the center of attention, whenever she appeared in public a role, she accepted with grace but little enthusiasm. Owen divided his time between tending his expanded cattle herd and helping William at the store, where his presence seemed increasingly natural. If the townsfolk noticed that his visits to Rico had become nearly daily, or that his manner with Willow had taken on a new certainty, they kept their observations to themselves out of respect. On a crisp October morning, with the aspens at the height of their golden glory and the first dusting of snow visible on the highest peaks, Owen arrived at the general store earlier than usual. He was freshly shaven, wearing his best clothes and carrying a small package. William looked up from arranging a display of canned goods, a knowing smile crossing his face. "She's upstairs helping Sarah with the mending," he said before Owen could speak. "Go on up. We'll make ourselves scarce." Owen climbed the stairs, his heart beating a rapid tattoo against his ribs. Sarah met him in the upstairs hallway, patted his arm encouragingly and disappeared downstairs, leaving him alone to knock on the parlor door. "Come in," Willow called. She sat by the window, her father's violin in her lap, sunlight catching the copper highlights in her hair. She wore a simple dress of deep green, and the silver violin brooch he'd given her was pinned at her collar. The sight of her made Owen's carefully prepared speech flee from his mind. "Owen," she said with evident pleasure, setting aside the violin to greet him. "I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." "Couldn't wait," he admitted, crossing to where she stood. "Been waiting too long already." Willow's eyes widened slightly at his intensity. "Owen, is everything all right?" In answer, he took her hands in his. "Willow Anderson, from the moment I pulled you from that river, my life hasn't been the same. You brought light back into a world I thought would always be shadowed. You made me remember what it's like to care about tomorrow, to have someone worth fighting for." He released one of her hands to retrieve the small box from his pocket. "I love you more than I ever thought possible. I want to build a life with you, whether that's at my cabin, here in Rico, or anywhere else you want to be." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled from Willow's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Owen Yates, I will marry you." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger. Then Owen was kissing her, lifting her off her feet in his joy, and Willow was laughing and crying all at once, her arms around his neck as they sealed their promise to each other. They were married on the first day of December 1879, in Rico's small white church. The building was filled beyond capacity, the townsfolk having embraced the romance of the river rescue and all that followed. William proudly walked his niece down the aisle, and Sarah dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony. Willow wore a gown of ivory satin that Sarah had ordered specially from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding dress. Her auburn hair was adorned with a wreath of evergreen and white winter berries, an idea suggested by John Blackfeather, who stood with Michael Harrington and Thomas Weber as Owen's groomsmen. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, decorated with pine boughs and ribbons for the occasion. There was music and dancing, with Willow performing one special piece on her violin, a melody she had composed for Owen that spoke of rivers and rescue. of love found in unlikely places. As the night grew late, and the newlyweds prepared to depart for their wedding night at the newly expanded and renovated cabin, William raised a final toast. "To Owen and Willow Yates," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded hall. "May the current that brought you together carry you safely through all the days of your life." Later, as they drove the wagon toward their home under a canopy of brilliant stars, Willow nestled against Owen's side, her head on his shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, though her contentment was evident in every line of her body. "Completely," she affirmed, "though I've been thinking." "About what?" "About the future, our future." She turned slightly to look up at him. "The cabin is wonderful, but with the herd expanding and eventually—" "Well, I've been thinking perhaps we should build a proper house, something big enough for a family." Owen's heart swelled at the implication. "A family," he repeated softly. "I'd like that very much." "So would I," Willow said, "and perhaps not too far from town. I love our privacy, but I'd miss Uncle William and Aunt Sarah if we were too isolated." "There's that piece of land where Lightning Creek joins the Animas," Owen suggested. "Good water, sheltered from the worst winds, and only 2 miles from Rico. Been thinking it would make a fine home site." Willow smiled against his shoulder. "You've been planning too?" "Hoping," Owen corrected. "Didn't want to presume." "It sounds perfect," Willow said. "We could start in the spring, and meanwhile—" She reached up to touch his face, turning it toward hers. "Meanwhile, we have all winter to enjoy our cabin, just the two of us." Owen reined the horses to a stop, taking the opportunity to kiss his wife properly, with no one around to see but the stars overhead. "Just the two of us," he agreed when they finally continued their journey. "For now." By the following Christmas, their lives had transformed yet again. The new house was nearly complete, a sturdy 2-story structure of timber and stone overlooking the junction of Lightning Creek and the Animas River. Owen's cattle herd had doubled in size, thriving under his careful management and William's business acumen. The partnership had proved profitable enough that Owen had hired 2 hands to help with the expanded operation. Willow had established a small school in Rico, teaching 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. 3 evenings a week, she also offered music lessons to anyone interested, a program that had surprised everyone with its popularity among miners and merchants alike. But the greatest change of all rested in Willow's arms as she sat by the fireplace in their nearly finished home on Christmas Eve. 2-month-old James Henry Yates regarded his mother with solemn blue eyes, his tiny fingers wrapped around one of hers with surprising strength. "He has your expressions," Willow told Owen, who sat beside her, unable to take his eyes off his son. "That serious contemplation of the world," Owen chuckled, "and your determination. Did you see how he held his head up yesterday? The doctor says he's strong for his age." "Of course he is," Willow said proudly. "With the bloodlines he carries, how could he be otherwise?" Outside, snow fell gently, blanketing the world in pristine white. The windows of their new home glowed warmly, visible from the road that led to Rico, a beacon for friends who would join them the following day for Christmas dinner. As James drifted to sleep in Willow's arms, Owen moved to build up the fire. He paused, watching his wife and son in the firelight, the 2 people who had become his entire world. If someone had told him 2 years ago that he would find such happiness, he would never have believed it possible. "What are you thinking?" Willow asked softly, noticing his contemplative expression. "About rivers," Owen replied, returning to sit beside her. "About how sometimes the current takes you places you never expected to go." He reached out to stroke his son's downy head. "Places far better than anywhere you'd planned." Willow leaned into him, her free hand finding his. "I think about that day often," she admitted. How close I came to being swept away, how differently everything might have turned out. Her eyes met his, filled with love. I'm so grateful you were there, that you reached out and said those words. Owen kissed her gently, mindful of the sleeping infant between them. Hold tight, I've got you, he quoted. Best promise I ever made. And kept, Willow added, every day since. As the snow continued to fall outside their window, the small family remained wrapped in the warmth of their home, and their love a love born in the churning waters of the Animas River, and tempered by all they had faced together. Whatever currents life might bring their way in the years ahead, they would face them as they had from the beginning, together, holding tight to one another, never letting go.